Yeah, so I'm going to first step back a little bit and give perspective. So GPI, which stands for Genuine Progress Index or Institute, or international, depending on what we use the I for right now. But anyway, Genuine Progress, as David was saying, we've done a lot of well-being research here, locally in Canada and also around the world. So we have sent many young people overseas on internships to volunteer, especially in Asia. So I want to do like a little bit of perspective on that because I think it fits in with what we're doing here. We spent a lot of time, actually for 6 years, our family lived half of each year in Bhutan, which is a little tiny Himalayan country, and we were there when they became a democracy. And that same year, which was 2008, they made a new law, which was anybody who owned more than 40 acres had to give it back, had to donate it to the greater good of the country. And I was looking and looking and looking at the newspapers, and there wasn't a single article of protest. There were no letters to the editor. There were no demonstrations. Nobody protested, because it's an extraordinary value system that people have there. So, of course, they first tried to give to their cousins and their aunts and uncles and keep it in the family. But then, when that was done, they just gave the money back, and the government turned around, and everyone who was landless or dispossessed, who was squatting on what we would call crown land or public lands, and there were many people like that who had built shelters or houses or yurts, who were squatting, were then given 5 acres per family of this donated land. And they were also, all of their moving was taken care of. There was a family that was really close to us where we were staying, and they didn't move. And I was talking to them, and they said, well, we want that land, we want to move, but we have a lot of stuff, and it won't fit on the bus. So we don't want to leave it behind. And so I told this to the general, the top general in Bhutan, and he sent his car. The next morning, there they were, and all the people were laughing and happy and loading up his SUV, which then drove to resettle this family and give them 5 acres. You can live, an extended family can do subsistence farming on 5 acres quite easily. So that is a really extraordinary social experiment. And the other thing that happened after we went to Bhutan is I came home and I said, we're insane, because look at all this stuff we have in our house. And I literally got 5 dump trucks of stuff to cart away everything that was crowding up our basement that I had been saving from my daughter's childhood, and made room, created rooms, and now we have somebody living in there actually. So that is one thing, trading stuff for people. So I just wanted to mention that. Then I also wanted to say that with youth, I have to type in this code here, sorry, to get my notes up. But with youth, they recognize these fundamental human needs, the human need for shelter. For them, it's like an instinct, too. So we think that maybe teenagers aren't aware of the struggles that the parents are going through with housing. They're keenly aware. They're very aware of climate change, and the fires that we've had, the flooding, the rising sea levels. They're very aware, and they feel insecure just from that environmental aspect. So from the very beginning, we have built shelters with youth, and we've done that as an ongoing part of our program, and the main one being a yurt. And we have had youth train in how to build yurts, and actually 3 of our youth members built yurts and live in them. One right here in St. Margaret's Bay. So they got those skills. But even if they never, ever live in a yurt or other kinds of shelter like that, the fact that they know that they can create their own shelter, that they can do that, changes their view of themselves completely. So that's just one thing I want to say, because when we were talking to young people over and over again, there was a theme, which is we need to know that we can have shelter and we can create it for ourselves. We can find a way to do it, and that we can have hope of having our own home. Whatever other things we need to do in the meanwhile, we need to know that there's a possibility that we'll be able to create our own home. I was talking to Kevin Hooper from United Way and the Community Land Trust just a moment ago, because that was a theme that came up for young people a lot, was the willingness and interest in intentional communities, tiny house villages, land trusts, co-housing, whatever. So because the thing that youth talked about a lot was missing community. So we had about youth that we talked to, about half divided up between youth who wanted to be in St. Margaret's Bay but couldn't, either because they needed to commute for work to town, or they just didn't have enough of a social life and they needed to connect with other young people, and they weren't feeling like they could do that here. So they had to then move to town and just come, out to the Bay on occasion, at least for periods of time. And then the other half were people who committed to living out here but couldn't find, had to constantly move around, weren't able to have secure housing. So they would have, and they were very creative, living on a boat for the summer, camping, figuring out a camping out, pet sitting so they could move from place to place. They had all kinds of ways of working with this, and also going back and living with family. And that was another thing that a lot of the young adults that I spoke to have been through, and their families have been through, is like we had this idea, this Western idea, that when you're a grown-up, then you have your own place. And if you don't have your own place when you're a grown-up, there's something wrong with you. So having to overcome that and feel like that it's okay. And then how do you live together and not feel like you're a small child again? My daughter and I had to go through that ourselves this year, as she's working on her PhD, but she was able to work from here, and we had to get some solutions for that, right? Yeah. So now when we talked to youth, we had three main questions. The first one was, what obstacles or challenges have you experienced in your pursuit of affordable and adequate and accessible housing? Because that was another thing. Yes, we had three questions.
3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes to go. Okay, sorry. I better hurry up.
12 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, housing inventory is very scarce and unaffordable, both in rural and urban settings, and of course, very exacerbated locally by the wildfires and floods. It says that trying to find a place to live is like a full-time job in itself, one youth said. Also, they have to maybe settle for less than desirable housing. One young couple that we talked to had to sign a 5-year lease just in order to have like adequate housing where there were some improvements made so that it was okay for them. Another young couple told us, well, they had a serious mold problem, but the landlord would only fix it if he was renovicting them, and then they would be without a home. So it's very competitive to find a house, and a lot of requests for higher damage deposits and so on. And then there's like financial issues, some financial illiteracy, just not knowing where to ask, not knowing how to navigate. Another young person that we talked to said like not having a credit history is a huge obstacle for youth. Nowadays it is even an obstacle for rental, but it's also an obstacle if they ever hope to own a home. One young fellow said, they're making way more money, they're paying way more money in rent than the mortgage was for this house that they tried to buy. They had a 30% down payment, but they still couldn't qualify because they didn't have an adequate credit history. So that's another theme. Also, like if they have to trade buying a car for being able to live out here, then, maybe that's not going to be a good trade-off. Anyway, so I think that the most important theme that came from that was just the need for community. So wanting to be connected to community and to live in a place where that was possible, and to be able to collaborate and help each other. So we asked them, what's your ideal living scenario? And rent to own was definitely the top of the list. Sense of community, improved transit, and also accessibility. For people have different kinds of needs for accessibility. For young people, there's like people who are on the spectrum. They need like reduced sensory input, maybe, for example, and the type of lighting is important and things like that. A lot of people really want to have access to some place to garden. But most important, what they want is to be able to have some autonomy and to have a sense of hope for the future, that they can actually have their own home at some point in the foreseeable future. They want to learn, we ask them now, how do you feel about home sharing and what would you want to do? So they're very interested, but also suspicious because they want to find, what kind of labor would be expected of them? Would there be a separate entrance that's important to them for their own independence? What are the beneficial living scenarios? They don't know how to advertise or look for opportunities. That's a big issue. How do you even find that kind of thing? They're interested in intergenerational living, but especially in ADUs, the accessory dwelling units. They don't know how that would work. They don't know how to work with other people renovating. They're also interested in three-season dwellings, so like that maybe they only have to find something for the winter, but they could have a place, in the warmer months. So I guess I'm just going to conclude this because I could go on and on, but those were some of the highlights.